Right, well, I wanted to welcome everyone here. I guess I'll do an introduction. As you know, my name is Tony Green, and just a little something about me. Well, I was born in Philadelphia, and I studied chemical engineering in Delaware. After I finished engineering school, I did a little bit of a different step. I had joined the Navy. I served aboard a nuclear-powered submarine based out of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And after I completed my service, I moved to Silicon Valley and took a job in semiconductors. Through the years, I've done engineering roles, sales, marketing, and right now I'm kind of where I'm passionate about, which is the environment and water. I'm a sales engineer, and I work with clients to help them reduce their water footprints through conservation, green, sustainable methods of conserving water. I guess I'll dive in. Tonight, I'd like to speak to you guys about sustainability as a path to peace, how to prevent the future wars over water supply. I know it's a little bit of a long title, but it does kind of, it does capture what I'm going to talk about. And so I guess with any further ado, I'll dive in. Basically, a basic agenda of what I'd like to talk about is I'm going to ask the question, is water the next oil? In terms of oil is things that countries are fighting over. Well, in the future, will oil be? And I'll talk a little bit about water and what the big deal is. And I'll touch on what water scarcity means and how it causes problems globally. And basically how things have come to this, where we're even discussing how people could even think about fighting over water. And then I'll say, have you ever come to blows over water? And of course, where there's a conflict, there has to be a solution. And I'm going to talk about the solution. And then the course of where we go forward from that, the choice really is ours. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to dive in. I'd like to open with a point, or really a quote. And the quote is, "Whiskey is for drinking, war is for fighting." Anyone? Correct answer. Now, if I had a bag of candy, you know, I would toss it to you. But, and I think he was half joking, but the way you think about it is, that slide wasn't supposed to go yet. But, but basically, he's saying that basically, you know, whiskey is for drinking, and if you drink whiskey in excess, I'm sure it would be detrimental to your life. But if you don't have water, you know, it will be instrumental to killing you, being that you'll die without 4 days of water. So I think water is pretty important. I mean, for drinking, obviously, but also for everything that you do. And it's really surprising on how deep water falls into everything. Agriculture, production, power generation, even as a means of transporting food and goods. And so water is really the key to life when you really get right down to it. Now, the earth is covered with 71% of water. So then the question says, well, how could we have any problems with drinking water? Well, the problem is that it's all salty, and we can't drink salt water. It's not good for us. And actually, less than 1% of the water on Earth is actually available for drinking. And basically, this shows where all the water goes. Basically, 97% is ocean, and so this is fresh water. And of that fresh water, most of that is in the ice caps and in the and the glaciers. And what I was going to say was, when you're at the end of that, you don't really have a lot of water that you have left to drink, as you can see in terms of what's in the lakes and what's in the rivers. So that's kind of the problem, is there's lots of water on the planet, but all of it just isn't readily available for us to use. And okay, water scarcity. Water scarcity basically means that there's not enough water to use for our needs. Now, this is the plan. You can see from the color that basically support uses in really North America and Europe are two places where there isn't a water scarcity problem. And there's kind of a couple types of scarcity. There's physical scarcity, where there's actually not enough water to drink. But there's also something called economic scarcity, where there's not enough water to basically drive the things that I had mentioned in terms of agriculture, in terms of the economy. And ultimately, if people are struggling in terms of their economy and worry about where they're getting their water, then people are going to be tense, and it's going to cause issues that we'll discuss later. 1 out of every 6 people lack access to safe drinking water. So we're in this room, one in the room globally would lack, and that's 1.1 billion people for those that are counting. More than 2 lack adequate sanitation, which is, that's a large number. And so, I think there was one point on the slide that I wanted to make. Yeah, 3,900 children die every day from waterborne diseases. And that's, you know, in this age of technology, I think that's really, it's just not, it's not acceptable. And the question comes to, well, how have we come to this? Why are we at a point to where there's not enough water for our planet? And there are basically 4 things. And the first thing is, which I'm sure won't come as much of a surprise to anyone, is climate change. And what's happening is, due to climate change, it's really going to affect, in terms of flooding, it's going to affect the ice caps are melting due to increased temperature, and it's also causing droughts. And what all of that is doing together is it's basically affecting the water that's available for the planet. And that's ultimately what and also one thing about the climate change is right now we're still not sure of what the impact will be because there are a lot of things that we don't know going forward. So that's one of the things. Another thing that's causing is global population. There are 7.3 billion people on Earth, and that's the number as of Sunday morning when I checked. And in terms of where the growth is going, there's a very high probability that it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 12 billion people by 2050. And the point I was going to make, which was on the slide, is how are we going to feed all those people? I mean, there's barely enough water for the folks who are here. So how are you going to feed so many more people? And it's going to be a problem that is really going to be addressed. Another problem is water use and source contradiction, meaning where people live isn't where the water is. For instance, in Asia has 60% of the population, but only 36% of the water resources. The Middle East has roughly 5% of the population, but only 1% of water resources. And so that's part of the problem is basically the water isn't where the people are. And that's one of the challenges. Another thing is, in terms of history, interestingly enough, the borders of countries have been on rivers. So if you have people from 2 different countries looking for the same river as a source of water, then that's where you're gonna have your problems. And basically the end result is that you're gonna have a problem where people will be coming at each other and trying to battle each other and compete for world resources. A few quotes here, Kofi Annan. Fierce competition for fresh water may become a source of conflict and wars in the future. Another one is many people think that the Middle East, water, not oil, will be the next source of wars. And I think there is some validity in terms of the conflict. But interestingly enough, when we actually took a look at the numbers, there weren't as many wars as you thought. It's going to come up here in a second, but there was roughly 1,200 sources of really conflict. And of those, really 21 came to where countries actually came to blows over water. 18 of them dealt with Israel in the Middle East. And so what I'm saying is that the seeds are there and people have been excited about the possibility, but the reality is that it hasn't really happened yet. And so one of the things I'd like to leave with you all is, if we don't think about this, that possibility will happen. In terms of countries thinking that their survival is at stake. And then if you're natural human nature, and especially if you have another country who you've been enemies with war historically, the whole leap of going to war over water doesn't sound as ridiculous as you might want it to be. The CIA, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the British Ministry of Defense all have put out papers saying that the possibilities of war in the future is definitely out there, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And in the 50 years, there have been 1,821 instances, 1,228 ended peacefully, and only 21 actually. So typically, people are finding peaceful ways to kind of solve their problems. And so, actually, this. Okay, and so now I want to talk about some examples of where water conflict has happened. Lake Chad is at the border of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. And what happened was it used to be the 6th largest lake on earth, and due to declining rainfall and really poor management of use, what they did is they drained it to where it was like 1/6 of its size. So what happened was the people who were nomadic, who lived off the water, and eventually they crossed, and it caused conflicts. There is on this slide where Nigerian fishermen and the where they were chasing in terms of for water, and then obviously the countries were across borders, and then military kind of conflict and battles over who owned the land from which water used to be. And so, another instance, Israel, Six-Day War. Actually, Israel was building a national water carrier, which they're basically appropriating all of the Jordan River for its use. And then the other Arab problems had a problem with that. They went to war for other reasons, but that was kind of the big thing that came out of that. And then after the war, Israel wound up with most of Jordan's fertile land. They wound up with the Gaza Strip. They also wound up with the Golan Heights, which all had lots of water, which Israel now is using. Hopefully we haven't skipped an example here. Oh, of course. How can we forget the Nile River? Longest river on earth. Actually, the Nile River starts in the highlands of Ethiopia and flows north to the Mediterranean Sea through Egypt. Interesting thing here. Actually, Egypt and Sudan actually hold the rights to all the water based on a 1929 agreement they made with the British. Ethiopia basically is the source of the river. And so there's been conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia over that painful fact. After the peace treaty, Anwar Sadat in 1980 had mentioned that the only thing that they would go to war over is water at this point, because obviously the Egyptians view the Nile as their own, even though there are 10 countries that are in that base, and 2/3 of the African population are threatened by war and famine. And so, and also important here is Egypt is the only country that's really wealthy enough to build plants, on its own. And so the rest of the countries of Africa are obviously very nervous. And what we're talking about is, people are talking about building dams affecting the down supply of the river and other people's water. And so that's kind of another area that that there's been conflict. The next slide should be India and Pakistan. The Himalayas are mountains, and they're in China and Tibet, and they go through. And what happened was, it used to be part of the British Empire, and when they split the British Empire up into India and Pakistan, they really didn't think about how the water was getting managed. So they've been really battling ever since. And since the river flows through India first, or upstream, India tries to have a lot of control over the rivers, which is kind of lousy for Pakistan. And so they've been battling. And obviously India is growing so big, and they need the water. And also they've been trying to put in dams in order to, harness for the electricity. But also when you put in a dam, it has drastic effects on the downriver water. And so that's something that hasn't been really worked through together as well as it should.
Excuse me?
Yes?
What do you mean by that bullet? Ethiopia has 84% of the Nile gushing out of its gorges?
Basically, all the water from the Nile starts in Ethiopia. And so, in other words, if Ethiopia would find some way to channel, let's say, all the water, they could basically leave. And that's kind of important. And so, Ethiopia has problems with Egypt, where Ethiopia can say, this is our water. Let's say if Ethiopia was really powerful and there was an emperor, they could, and that would be really catastrophic. Sudan, all these countries which are agricultural based, and they depend on their water for their livelihood. So
they're the source, that's the point.
Okay, and there's India and Pakistan. And even in the past, India has cut off water to Pakistan. And the Indian stance, not the most friendly, but basically they told the Pakistanis to deal with it. And so that caused problems. However, I'm not here to talk about problems. I'm here to talk about solutions. And I'll cut to the chase. There are going to be really two ways for solutions. It's going to be through technology, and it's going to be through cooperation. If we do those two things, then we probably aren't going to have to worry about wars being fought over water. First technology, desalination. Desalination is basically boiling or getting rid of the salt that's in the water and making that drinking water. And there are two basic technologies. Desalination, where you're heating the water, and also reverse osmosis, where you have a membrane, and it's basically a filter. And so this is the system where it goes through a pre-treatment and it passes through the membranes, and eventually you'll get drinking water. Actually, reverse osmosis takes out everything, and sometimes you have to add things back into it so that it has taste. Another technology, fog harvesting. And what happens is there's water in the air, even though you can't see it. So if you're in a foggy location and you have enough wind, you can capture a lot of water to provide water for the family. And it's been used in Ethiopia, it's been used in Guatemala, and in Chile, other foreign countries, to provide drinking needs for a family because of the water, in which you wouldn't think it's just fog. But there's a lot of water that's in the fog. And those are two examples of technologies that the planet could actually use to solve its water needs. Now, the other part of the solution is the cooperation part. And so I wanted to talk about some of the instances of cooperation. Slides are going to do its thing at this point. 1960, in this water treaty, where basically the Pakistanis and the Indians agreed to split up the water. And then they've also agreed to work together in terms of basically using the river in the most sustainable way possible. But it's hard, because all that history of conflict is hard for them to really cooperate and work together. These slides will catch up. But also there was the 1994 peace treaty where, I think I'll advance it here. Okay, this was the Indus. Yes. Actually, this is the Tigris and Euphrates River, the Fertile Crescent. And Turkey, Iraq, and Syria have been battling over the water forever as well. And so this Trilateral Institute, where everyone got together and they said, we are going to determine on how we're going to work together. 1994 peace treaty involved Israel and Syria. And even today, we can see the unrest in Syria, and a lot of the unrest is due to the drought and the problems where the water is getting managed. Now, the last conflict is the Aral Sea, but this is kind of an asterisk because it's not really a conflict in terms of countries battling for the same water. What had happened was the Aral Sea used to be it used to be the world's largest inland sea, and the Russians decided they wanted to try to irrigate cotton, and what happened is essentially they drained it. And so the countries that are now around the Aral Sea, which is Pakistan, Uzbekistan, a few others, they all got together and said, we're going to contribute 1% of our incomes to replenishing this sea in the spirit of cooperation. And so those are just instances where people are cooperating together to work through their water issues. And it's something that they're going to need to do because the climate change and the problems aren't going to go away, and the population growth isn't going to slow down. And so I think it's really important that if you focus on the technologies and we focus in the spirit of cooperation, you can put people in a position where they won't feel that they'll have to lay their lives down just for the drinking water that they need to survive. Oh, by the way, this boat used to be in the Aral Sea, and as the water drained, there was really obviously nowhere to take the boat, so the boat is just out in the middle of a pasture. And it kind of gives you a picture of the magnitude. The Nice-and-Bale Initiative was basically where Egypt, we had talked about the Nile in Africa, and Ethiopia in 1999, where they all got together and said, we are going to come up with a better plan to manage the river. And so that's what that's about. Now another, it's kind of a mystery solution. The reason there's a question mark here is there are tons of aquifers that are under the earth, but we don't know what's in them. We don't know if they're stressed to the point where they're about to run out, or if there may be enough water in there to actually solve our needs. And what we need to do is, we need to find out. We need to go and say, is this going to be a solution, or is this going to be a problem? And it's kind of interesting to where, I mean, and there's a lot of water under here that could be helping the drier regions of the world. But right now, people don't really have an idea, of what is in these aquifers. I mean, who knows? The solution could be right under our feet. And it's something that we just need to figure out. And the question is, how does this tie into sustainability? Well, the three tenets of sustainability are social, economic, and the environment. And so if you use the technology and the cooperation to improve the social, environmental of people, everyone's lives are better served by doing it, which kind of ties into sustainability and using the Earth's resources and not consuming them, and ensuring that there are resources left for our children. As you know, yesterday was Veterans Day. This is Daniel Summers, and he was a private first class in Iraqi freedom, and he actually, from the post-traumatic stress of the war, decided that he didn't feel as though life was worth living anymore. And he had committed suicide. And then there was a letter that Congressman Rand Paul wrote and said, we should demand an end to abuse of military members and return a foreign policy that promotes peace and prosperity. So if there weren't any more reasons why we should do this, guys like, I'm a veteran, guys like this will go and bad things will happen to them, because we really can't come up with solutions to our water problems other than armed conflict. And so this was on the Peace Center website. And I thought it was really appropriate to include it just to really kind of bring home in terms of what needed to be done. And the letter, yeah, I am sorry, that it's come to this. But in the long term, I'm here to say that it does not have to come to that. We can take steps to prevent the reality. Final quote: "A drop of water is the basis for living, and without it, there can be no development or no peace." Now, typically during my presentations, I kind of like them to be interactive. It's not a lecture. But I mean, we kind of went through, but now I'd like to open a door to questions and dialogue, because I think that's really important to talk about this stuff. So if there are any questions or anything you want to talk, anything you don't disagree with, fire away.
I was wondering if we could do something with the salt from the desalination. Is there some idea of what to do with the salt that won't harm the environment?
I have an idea. Actually, there are certain plants that are that are less sensitive to salt. My idea is, first is algae. Algae is very heavy in oil and you can use it for biofuels. So I'm thinking that some of the plants that that grow in the salt, you could use to grow and produce biofuel. So you could use that brine water to grow these plants. So that way you're using that salty water for something.
You could grow algae that is edible for us or something, maybe. Or
I think that's that's possible. But typically, since algae has so much oil, the whole idea is if you can grow it and then you can produce that oil from without using the Earth's resources, and just produce the oil that's in the algae, and then you can kind of regrow the algae and you
take
can
the algae or take the oil out of it for use.
Yeah, but I mean, I think within the next 10, 15 years, people are going to be trying to figure out how to use the salty water for benefit. I know, for instance, being a chemical engineer, you could use salty water to in your heating and cooling evaporation systems, because it works pretty well as a refrigerant. But yeah, smart people and not so smart people need to come together and try to come up with clever ideas to use that brine, because in terms of desalination, you know, most people automatically, well, wait a minute, where's the brine going? And I mean, yeah, of course you shouldn't just be throwing it,
Yeah,
you know, into the ocean.
throw it in,
And so,
all into the ocean or into the land. Don't use it.
yeah, I don't think putting it into the ground doesn't work either, because I mean, water is very incompressive, and so if you're throwing tons of water into the ground, there's got to be seismic concerns that you're going to have if you throw enough water in the right places, you know, along the right fault lines, which we still don't really know where they all are.
Yeah.
And so,
They talk about underground storage, and that's something I never quite understood. I guess it's replenishing aquifer, but how did they get the water down there to the place below the earth where it's being stored? Is it just soak in, or?
oh well, typically, let's say when it rains, I mean, ultimately, what doesn't get soaked into the soil eventually goes down into the ground, and you have the bedrock. And then they basically, it forms, I mean, once you get below the water table, and it can pull and collect in reservoirs. And so one of the things that the water guys are really focused on is they're focusing on replenishing the reservoir, whereas naturally it happens, you know, with normal rain over time. And so what folks who are trying to do is increase the speed of that process in terms of having water available to put in the reservoir to replenish the water that we draw out. And so it's a little bit different than the electricity, whereas, you know, if you have a meter and you're using solar power, and all of a sudden you see your meter turning back and you're getting cash rebates for the electricity that you're generating. Water is kind of, it's kind of a little bit of a different idea. A lot of the water engineers that I've spoken to, they're really focused on refilling the reservoirs, because the reservoir, I mean, right now we don't have really rain harvesting technology, so the water that we're pulling from is in the reservoir. So they want to put water in the reservoir to, I guess, increase that bank account, so that, you know, we can continue to pull from it, you know, regardless of the drought or regardless whether it rains, and there'll just be enough water in there to meet all of our requirements. So.
This is in regards to the problem, and it has to do with the images that you see about fracking and how people in the areas will turn on their water faucets and stick a match to it and it lights up. Have you seen that?
So
You mean
ridiculous.
someone to turn on a faucet and they put a match and it will light?
Yeah.
You mean gasoline wasn't coming out of your faucet?
Yeah. It's,
You mean because of something in the water?
and it's happening because of fracking,
Oh.
going for natural gas, so that would be interesting.
Oh, okay.
And it's
You know.
happened in some places.
Actually, yeah,
Oil
and
spill.
absolutely, because what means hydraulic fracturing. And basically what happens is typical oil, it's in a pool, so you can tap it and it's the bubbling crude. Fracking is, the oil is in the rock. It's not in a free pool because of geological reasons. So you have to basically put water in, hot water, to kind of break up that oil that's in the rock, and then you can pull it up. But absolutely, if you've got oil and the oil is actually getting into wells, and you're pulling from that well, absolutely there could be enough natural gas, there could be enough things in that water to, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen any, you know, articles or any stories, but just from an engineer, it's probable, actually. Probably, I mean, if you had the right concentration, the right soil, because soil will naturally absorb a lot of things, but not all of it. And so what happens is if it's going through the soil, eventually it gets into the water table, and you pull from a well, for instance, absolutely.
I'm going to write a name of a movie for you to see that, because I think that has the potential of being a really big problem in the future. If they're going for natural gas in such an aggressive manner, and they're not paying attention to the people who are living in the area, and their homes are being worth nothing. Because they can't sell it, and they have to leave because they're being poisoned by the water that is available.
Here for the Peace Center program?
I mean,
Here for the Peace
They're
Center
being-
program?
no, the criminal and social justice
I've
program.
heard a bunch of people over there.
Okay, it's, but
You know, I haven't heard anything, but I mean, I would think that would, you know, definitely be.
You have the background, you have a lot of knowledge, it would be something to pay attention to. This is another call to get people to pay attention.
You know, the good thing about the pipeline that, you know, for now has been canceled is that pipeline runs right through the aquifer. And it's the main aquifer. It's the aquifer. One of the things about that aquifer, though, is, I mean, once that aquifer is gone, it's gone. Because where it was formed from the Ice Age, and once that, a lot of that water that melted, you know, ran into the earth and found that huge pocket. So that's not going to get replenished naturally by rain from where it is. So once that thing is gone, it's gone. And being that the whole bread belt pulls its water from that, you know, it should concern people to put that in jeopardy. And so.
You would think, yeah.
And how much rain would we need to have to get the California aquifer that's being depleted so quickly to be replenished?
Oh, you mean how much water?
How much rain would we need?
Oh, for the rain, I mean,
Years of
I was going to say months. But I would say months and months of
nonstop.
because what happens over a drought, you know, now another interesting thing is California has always had droughts. I mean, the whole drought thing in California isn't, I mean, it's not a problem. It's a fact of life. But the problem is when you put these droughts with climate change, because there's always the idea that, okay, well, the rains will come back and will replenish. Now, hopefully the Australians have learned, because they had like a 12-year drought, and they've come out of their drought kind of racing, and they've got rain. And so hopefully they learned their lesson to say, because what happens is, oh, okay, we've got our rains, we're done. You know, all the desal plants, mothball those, all those other plans for water conservation, you know, away, and there's water away. And it's not the answer. And you have to look at the long term. Now also in the history, there have been droughts that are 100 years in length. Not to say that that's the way it is, but it's possible. And we, you know, as citizens, really need to start to think, and the answer is really to conserve. Yes?
I think part of the solution you haven't talked about yet is reusing water. We tend to use perfectly good drinking water to flush our toilets and shower with and water our plants with, where they could just as well be using water that's run through our dishwashers and run through our washing machines.
Absolutely.
So,
I've done presentations on gray water.
yeah.
And I've met with some people, and so for those of you not familiar with gray water is basically water that's been used once that is not fresh drinking water but can be used for other applications. Now, I've talked to people who use gray water on their plants, and they say their plants grow better than normal. And I think the reason is because a lot of what's in the water, like your laundry water, has phosphates in it from the soaps, which are natural fertilizers. And I think that gives the tomatoes and the greens, you know, an extra boost. But yeah, that is an absolutely valid point. And the whole idea is that all the time to produce drinking water, all of it doesn't need to be drinking quality. For instance, your toilet. What are you doing in your toilet? Well, we know what we're doing in our toilet. So it's a waste of water. It's a waste of energy to process it. It's a waste to clean it when it's going to be in your toilet, and you're just going to take care. Now, I got a question for you guys. Would you guys have any issues if the toilet was brown or black because it's not clean water? Now, would people walk to a toilet and be grossed out by that? Would you?
You mean if the water in the toilet was brown?
If it was not clear.
Get used to it.
I agree with you.
It's mental conditioning, yeah.
But and that's one of the points that, you know, or shower water.
Yeah.
What happens if the shower, when the shower's cold and you wait a few seconds for it? You could be using that water. You could be storing that water.
I've been heating up the water in the shower because they have it on it's a hose thing. I have that in a bucket. And it's half a bucket before it's warm enough to shower with. So
Yeah, typically in your house,
I use that for flushing.
yeah, it's basically typical on average you'll get 2 gallons per minute flow rate, meaning that if I have a gallon of milk and I basically put it on their faucet, it should take roughly 30 seconds to fill from the top. And that's, you know, so if you take that bucket, I've had presentations where I brought in a gallon of water, you know, and I pass it around. It's heavy. And so that's 1 gallon of water. and a typical family may use 2,000 roughly. And so it helps put in frame on how much water you waste. You know, when you actually see this is a gallon, and then you look at your water bill, you know, where's the water, you know, going? And so that's, you know, stuff is just something to think about in terms of their percentages. And I mean, that's why, you know, laundry to landscape, where you're basically using your laundry to water plants and gardens. And it, you know, really helps, especially here since the growing climate is so good. And I remember there was a lady who I interviewed for the gray water presentation. And she basically, you know, put lemon trees in her yard up in the city. And, you know, and one of the things she, you know, when she started to grow in the lemons, and she was using the lemons, I guess lemons are pretty expensive up there. And they were like free lemons, and they were just same quality lemons, which she grew from water from, you know. During the Great Water presentation, we actually talked about that a little bit in detail on what you have to do. And for instance, you can't have that water just sitting around all day, because basically what's in it is when you wash, there's bacteria in that water. And so if you let it sit, it'll grow, and it'll become septic, and it'll have problems. So that's why you really should either use it point for use, or you could actually store it, but you'd have to stir it, you know, to make sure it's aerated, to make sure it's not standing still rotting. I think waste harvesting, very Australian. Other folks around the planet have done the drought thing. Israel, Australia. Let's learn from them in terms of what they've done. I mean, because they've done some of this stuff before, and it's silly to go and reinvent the wheel, you know, in terms of coming up with solutions. You know, some of the solutions are out there. So.
I think cities should be requiring new construction to be plumbed to use
Actually,
water.
It is.
And they're not,
2018, all new construction homes in California will be required to have gray water valves with them, meaning that you'll have a tap to where you could take it. Now, they'll come, if you don't have a setup, you know, it'll come with a plug, but it'll come to where you can actually tap off that gray water. Because right now it's one pipe in, one pipe out. That's wrong. It should be, you know, a pipe in, but other pipes out between your recycled, your gray, and you should be able to manage that instead of just having one pipe in and then one pipe that all goes to the sewer.
Yeah.
So there's legislation that has passed?
Actually, it's passed. I think Arizona went in a few years ago. California, it'll be all new homes will be required to have gray water setups by 2018.
Good, I hadn't heard that.
So are they encouraging the gray water to be, I mean, obviously you can make people, you can't leave, okay, they're encouraging people to have access to the gray water. They're teaching people how to use it?
Actually, I would like to see more of an outreach in terms of having people use it. But I know there's there's a lady in Redwood City, is it Laura Allen? Well, anyway, she does classes, and she's kind of the guru on gray water. And it's a good thing. It makes, you know, a lot of sense. And in terms of when you look at what's in your water, I mean, for instance, your laundry water is still water, but it's got dirt in it. It's got, you know, and in terms of shower water, now you can't use toilet water, but you can use that water, you know, for different uses, and you can drastically cut your water use down and save on your water bill, and, you know, help make things better. And I think our children, my children, we all need to have a better sense, because water has no value right now. It's been free, it's been clean forever. So now you guys, all of a sudden you're saying, well, wait a minute, I need to conserve this water? Why? And if you look at a water bill needs to go up. And the reason is we haven't paid for the infrastructure to keep it up over the years. And that's why a lot of water leaks in the piping system, because it's leaking, it's gone. And then you get a lot of waste just from the piping, which hasn't been, you know, maintained, because we're not really getting the full price of the water that we get. It's kind of swallowed in the taxes and municipal societies. California has 666 municipals, organizations. How on earth are you going to get anything done when you've got all these little municipals battling, nothing gets done, everyone's arguing for their little turf? Electricity, on the other hand, there are basically 3 IOUs in the state: PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Consolidated Ed. So when they get together and decide, and they're investor-operated companies, they can get smart things done, like smart meters for electricity, but smart for water, but water's catching up, and that's a good thing. But I mean, we can measure electricity to the amp. But water, I don't know. For instance, my water bill is, what was it? It was 5 CCF, which means hundreds of cubic feet. A cubic feet is what, 748 gallons. So if I use 4, 748 times 4, the next thing is 5, which is another 748 gallon leak. You mean to tell me I can't measure my water in a unit less than 700 gallons? Whereas for electricity, you can measure it to the amp, to the milliamp. And so that's kind of where we need to go. I think there needs to be a state water czar. I think there should be a national water czar. To basically someone to oversee water from a country point of view. To kind of, because all across the country, water is split up into many little, there needs to be an overall body and say, guys, this is what we're doing for the good of this country. Never mind what you've done, for the last 50 years. And right now you don't get that. And so the organizations are all splintered and fragmented, and it really needs to kind of come together to help. I've heard a quote, water whatever the weather. And that has to be the thinking. Droughts aren't going to stop, even with climate change. And I don't even know what the impact of that will be. We need to stop and really take time to think about what we're doing in terms of our water. Talking about this water, I think about it now. I kind of feel guilty, the water in my toilet, which I need to get a new one, because there's a measure. You can measure how much water your toilet flows. Now, on the label, it'll say 1.6 gallons for a typical toilet. And so if you take the time that it flushes, -1 divided by 2, it'll roughly give you the gallons per minute that it flows. So, it should be a few seconds, -1/2, it should be like 3 seconds, roughly. Mine was like at 7 because it was just flushing so slow. And I was like, man, you know how much water I'm using? I felt kind of bad. And so, and that's just kind of, I think it's kind of the thinking that we have to do. Or you could have a leak on your faucet. Now you have leaks that you can't see, but if you can at least see a leak, the drop over time, it really adds up. And so, also I think Americans, in terms of a little spoiled in a way, because we have water all the time, right? We can turn on for anytime we want. We get water overseas. That's not the case. Even in India, for instance, there'll be certain spots where half the time they won't have access to water, or they'll have to bring in their own water systems, or out to pay some guy. Hey, I'm out of water. And some guy comes with a truck and fills you up, and you pay him. Whereas it's just not. And also, at least in India, there are situations where the engineering, where the sewage pipe was near the freshwater pipe, and over time you got leakage to where you're getting residual sewage in your freshwater, and we don't deal with that here. And so that's, you kind of look at the rest of the world and you kind of realize, how we're pretty fortunate actually. And so that's kind of, but the gray water thing, I'm kind of really big into that. The other thing that's really big is the water energy nexus, whereas water and energy are tied. A lot of the electricity in this state is used pumping water from the Sierras down to Southern California. A lot of electricity. And so if you look at conserving water and meeting your water needs more locally, then you don't have to have that piping, you don't have to use all that electricity. And also, in terms of dams, and that's one of the things that we've seen is with the drought, there's less water in the dams producing less renewable electricity, which a dam is. And so you get that as well, which isn't really, out there. And so,
You need to be speaking to our politicians. You're a good speaker.
I'll talk to them if they'll listen. But and one of the things I've made points in other presentations, we need to say, guys, this is what we want. We're your constituents. We elect you. This is what we demand to happen. And at some point, if you don't start moving on this stuff, you could risk not going back to DC or, Sacramento. And until it really comes to that, then it's not really going to have the bite.
We're not stupid, and like that soldier who committed suicide, it doesn't need to be like this.
No, I don't. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. So,
Wow.
Well, thanks for.
well, thank you for having me.
Excellent.
You know,